when the American ambassador goes to Saddam Hussein, April Glaspie, and she testified to this in front of Congress but didn't go anywhere. He says, we're going to go back to our original boundaries, which means he's going to take back Kuwait, which was illegally taken and carved out of Iraq in the first place by the British years ago, so they could get their hands on some of those southern Iraqi oil reserves. And he asked the American ambassador, you know, what do y'all think about that? And her almost exact answer was, well, I've been instructed to inform you that we consider that an Arab problem and we don't really have any thoughts on that. What does that sound like? Sounds like do what you want to do. And then the minute he sends his troops into Kuwait, oh, he's the new Hitler. All right, and the Saudis put up a $12 billion war chest hidden in a secret account in London for George Bush to use to prosecute the Persian Gulf War. It's a deal, folks. It's just a deal. They're all just deals. This whole thing right now. I'll tell you what I suspect. We all know this thing about Iraq is about oil. But why do we need the oil? We got plenty of oil in the United States, and we're not getting that much out of the Middle East anyway. And besides that, we now have our troops in Afghanistan, which means we now control the Caspian Sea oil reserves. Something that's been a big bone of contention for the last 100 years, ever since the Nobel brothers went over there and started production in the Caspian Sea area. When Hitler sent his Sixth Army charging through the Ukraine, they weren't going to capture Stalingrad. They were trying to get to those Caspian Sea oil reserves, but they got stopped at Stalingrad. It's been a big bone of contention. Everybody wants to get a hold of Caspian Sea oil. Well, now we have it. And Britain now wants their share. They want the Iraqi oil. And it's really funny because we see Tony Blair standing up, and he's pushing for war with Iraq just about as hard as George Bush. And we think, oh, our wonderful British allies, boy, they're with us through thick and thin. I think once you study these secret societies and where they came from and who's really behind all this, it's the other way around. BP wants the oil, but they can't move British troops into Iraq because, quite correctly, that would be perceived as aggression. But the United States has already fought a war with Iraq, so we can go in and take it for them. And y'all just hide and watch. If we have a war and we have a regime change and we gain control over Iraq, you hide and watch if British Petroleum doesn't get a big chunk of that. It's all about oil. We all know that. And the problem is we're all so fat and sassy. Well, yeah, but I got to have gas for my car, man. I got to drive down to the 7-Eleven and get a pack of cigarettes, you know. I mean, yeah, it's only a block away, but who wants to walk a block, you know? We are just really we just have no idea of the misery in most of the world because we all have it so well. I mean, you know. So it's all about oil, and my big complaint there is we don't need the damn oil, okay? We don't need to be on a petroleum energy basis anyway. There's so much other things we could be doing. Do you realize that with just some tweaking of the intake jets in your carburetor, you could be running your car on hydrogen? And hydrogen does not cause any pollution. And hydrogen is the most plentiful substance on the planet. Think about it. This is a water planet. H2O, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. We could be burning hydrogen. We don't even need the damn oil. But no, we're going to go over there and kill a whole bunch of people and probably our own troops. And look what's happening with the Gulf veterans right now. They're all coming down with all kinds of sicknesses, probably because of the contaminated vaccines they got. Also, the depleted uranium shells that were lying everywhere, giving them a radiation dose that destroys their immunization system, not to mention the oily smoke and petrochemicals hanging in the air. And do you think that a new war with Iraq is going to be any better? Never mind the massive casualties that Iraq's going to suffer. Wait till our guys come back in another 20 years and they'll be raising hell about their health problems. And what's the government going to do about it? I'll tell you right now, not a damn thing. Let me tell you something. When I was in the Army, this just really gets my blood to boiling when I think about this. When I was in the Army back during Vietnam, we'd get C rations, and in the C rations, along with the powdered milk and this, that, and the other thing, was a little packet of cigarettes. Get 5 little cigarettes. We always thought that was cool, free cigarettes. and those who didn't smoke would swap them around to those who did, and it was almost a medium of exchange. And that practice goes way on back even through World War II. Where do you think all those guys in World War II got the smoking habits? Because the Army gave them free cigarettes. And now under the Clinton administration, when some of these guys who put their life on the line to fight for freedom and democracy in World War II, and they start coming down with emphysema and lung cancer, and they go to the VA under the Clinton administration, they ruled that that was a self-inflicted disease and that they would not treat the veterans. That's shameful, folks. That's shameful. You give your soldiers cigarettes all through their career and then you won't treat them when they get a health-related problem? Unconscionable. But that's what happens when you let these secret society creeps run your country. Going back past the Gulf War, and now we get back to Vietnam, and Lyndon Johnson and his wise men, okay, he surrounded himself with about 12, 14 guys, and they were every one of them Council on Foreign Relations. In fact, Vietnam, the thing I never could quite figure out is why were we fighting 9,000 miles away from the shores of the United States? Well, let me tell you why. Because right after World War II, the Council on Foreign Relations published some papers that were saying we needed to gain control over the mineral resources of Southeast Asia, which at that time was called French Indochina. All right, but then in the spring of 1954, the French got defeated at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, and they withdrew from French Indochina. Within weeks, John Foster Dulles, a founder of the Council on Foreign Relations, and who was then Secretary of State to Dwight Eisenhower, goes to the Philippines and creates something called the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, SEATO. And he later explained that he did that to give the American president the legal precedent for intervention in Southeast Asia. That was the beginning of the whole thing. Now, is he acting on the best interest of the United States, or is he acting on the best interest of the Council on Foreign Relations that wanted control over those mineral resources? And of course, I don't have to tell you what happened. 58,000 American lives later, we finally slunk away with our tail between our legs, defeated by a bunch of guys in rubber sandals, thanks to the wise men. And in the middle of this, when our guys are dying in the jungles of Vietnam, who's over in Russia but David Rockefeller meeting with Khrushchev? And with the insistence of David Rockefeller and his other powerful friends at the Council on Foreign Relations, they encouraged Lyndon Johnson to increase loans to Russia at levels higher than we did in World War II when they were our allies against Hitler. Now, what does this mean? It means, folks, that while our sons and daughters and brothers and husbands were over there fighting for their lives in the jungles of Vietnam, we were told we had to do that because North Vietnam was a surrogate of China and Russia, and that if we didn't stop them there, then it's the domino effect, and they'd take over the Philippines, and they'd take over Hawaii, and they'd take over this country, and we had to stop them right there. And that they were getting arms and ammunition from China and Russia, and it was an anti-communist crusade. And to that extent, it was true. They were getting arms and ammunition and war materials from China and Russia. And Russia was getting loans from us. And they take our tax-supported money and they build facilities like the Kama River Truck Factory, and they'd crank out war materials to ship to North Vietnam to use against our guys. Does that make any sense to anybody? But that's what goes on, folks, and it's still going on. And unless we start waking up, it's going to continue. If you stop and think about it, gunfire is pretty well decided every national election from 1964 to 1988. 64, Lyndon Johnson wins on the sympathy because of the JFK assassination. 68, Nixon wins after the reaction to the Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy shootings. Then in 1972, George Wallace looks like he's going to pull votes from Nixon, and he's shot. 1976, Carter wins after there were assassination attempts on Gerald Ford, and then in 1980, Reagan is elected after an assassination attempt on Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, you don't remember the assassination attempt on Jimmy Carter? Why, he had asked for national TV time in the late spring of 1979, and he was going to announce some sweeping changes in government, including curtailing the CIA. But then he goes to Los Angeles, and he's attacked by Raymond Lee Harvey and Oswaldo Ortiz. So Lee Harvey and Oswaldo were going to kill him in Los Angeles. There it is. You saw it in the Newsweek article, but you don't remember that, do you? Because it didn't get distributed in the news media. And right after that, he canceled his national TV talk, went to the seclusion at Camp David, called in everybody up to and including Billy Graham, and said, "I've lost control of the government." And he was out, and Reagan was in. And 2 months after Reagan was elected, he's shot. And if that bullet had been that much closer, it had hit his heart, and we would have had George Bush 8 years earlier. People don't think about that, do they? Oh, well, I guess that's a conspiracy theory. Speaking of, you're going to love this one.